So, Hunter, I think by now most people are aware of the drinking water crisis in Flint, Michigan. Let's just talk at first before we get into the nature of these cases. To what extent, I mean, what is it that needs to be shown for a case to prevail in terms of the liability of the state, or in this case, the municipality that's being sued?
Well, when we talk about, as you know, there are multiple claims in the Flint disaster, water disaster. Certainly, front and center are the claims against the city, the water district, and the state. Michigan has what we call a governmental immunity statute. They are pretty well protected by statute from what would be ordinary negligence. You need to show something more than what we would have to establish to prove liability against an individual person or a private company. The actual standard is intentional act, gross negligence, outrageous conduct. And most people would say, wow, how could you ever establish that against a state or a governmental entity? It'll never happen. Well, I can state in terms of doing this over 30 years, I've never seen a situation where such gross negligence, such disregard, reaching the level of punitive damages has ever been established before the first bit of discovery in a case, and I can only imagine what else we'll find down the road. But to answer your question directly, it's an intentional act, a gross negligence, an outrageous conduct is what's required to establish the liability against the municipalities and the state in particular.
Let me just, I mean, the statute that says that they need to be held to a higher standard to establish liability, has that ever been attacked? Or,
sure.
I mean, is that settled law? I mean, or...
Well, if the question is like, are we going to attack the statute itself, saying it's unconstitutional? These statutes are constitutional. It's unfortunate, but governmental entities can only be sued to the extent that they allow themselves to be sued. And it's not uncommon to find statutes such as this that require a heightened standard of proof in order to establish liability.
Okay. So, all right, with that said, give us a sense of whether or not, in this case in Michigan, there is another unique aspect to this insofar as these decisions were made not by an elected official, but by an appointed emergency city manager. Well, basically democracy, I don't know any other word to put, frankly, call it, had been suspended. So is there a greater sense of liability, or does it affect the standard because we have a fairly, as far as these things go, unique situation in terms of the government officials who made the decisions that led to this outcome?
Well, I like to look at it as something akin to martial law. You had a municipality that was going bankrupt or bankrupt. You had a government that was failing. The state, under the state charters, is required to step in and take control. You had a city manager or board of city managers that were appointed pursuant to that statutory authority. And what happens then is those people, even though they replaced the elected officials, they sit there with the protection of the state, is the claim being made, that, you know, they have every protection as if the governor did it himself. There is immunity for what they did, and that they're doing this in order to preserve the assets and preserve the city as a working municipality, and they get to cloak themselves in the protection of governmental immunity, whether or not they're elected officials or not, or are or not elected elected officials.
And will you, in attempting to, I mean, will you even take on that premise? Not so much that they're cloaked in immunity, but that the decisions that they made were necessary, or even beyond necessary, even had the desired impact they wanted of saving money. Because my understanding is that the way this timeline goes is that there was a desire to change the water source from Detroit to a source that has never been used before. One of the Great
It was the
Lakes.
Flint River. I mean, they switched from the Detroit water supply to the Flint River, where they drew their own water and processed their own water.
And my understanding is that the Detroit, there was an offer, I guess, from the Detroit water system to essentially save cash, that it wasn't necessarily, there wasn't necessarily at least a short-term financial issue involved in this.
Well, I mean, we have to look at it at different stages of when this all transpired. Clearly, no one is going to suggest they had bad motive switching to the Flint River. And I don't know of any plaintiff's lawyer suggesting that. They did it for proprietary function. That's a very important aspect. Remember, providing water is a proprietary function. It's not like police. It is not like your fire department. It is the municipality selling water for a profit to the members of the public of their city. This is a profit center. So what they did was they said, we can find water and process it ourselves cheaper, and then buying it from Detroit and just passing it along. Nothing wrong with that. It's done all the time, which, by the way, proprietary function is something that easily can be argued falls outside of governmental immunity. As long as you're doing it for profit and you're not doing it as a, to protect you're not doing it as part of your governmental responsibilities, there is an exception to governmental immunity. But going directly to the point, they tried to find a cheaper source of water to sell to their customers. This way, they were never looking to lower the price to the customers. They were looking to make more profit when they sold the water to the customers. Mm. So and this is a clear-cut. If a private company did this, they'd be just as responsible as a governmental entity.
Right, and ultimately, this is a story, and we got to take a break here, but this is a story of cutting corners, or and if they didn't, they cut those corners unknowingly, they should have known about cutting those corners before they started this endeavor, and I'll get you to tell me I'm either right or wrong on that when we return. We've got to take a quick break. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio.